Hey guys, this is Frank Pierce from Troubled Minds Radio.
Michael Strange here. Hey, let me ask you this, Frank. Let me posit this to you. Of all the images you've ever seen of Mars from NASA or the European Space Agency in all of history, how many have actually depicted some sort of frozen or liquid water that you can remember? Just shooting from the hip off the top of your head.
Not very many. I think in the past, we've seen channels carved out, stuff that looks like ancient riverbeds, recently ice cap pictures, but not too many.
Okay, which is true. So I thought the same thing, and there's some news that's out recently where they discuss actual underwater channels on Mars. Okay, so we'll get to that in just a sec, but I want to pull these up so you guys can see what we're talking about. Now, this is just Mars planet image is the search on Google. Okay, and if you go down the images of the planet itself, right, some of the more recent ones, you can kind of barely see a little bit of ice on the top and on the bottom of this thing. But almost, let's say 90% of these things depict zero ice, zero water, zero anything. It seems to be a red, dry planet, devoid of life, devoid of water, and the Mars we know and love. Okay, well, that's definitely not the case. So if you're not familiar with this turns into an interesting story very quickly. So we've got as you can see from the Wikipedia here that I have up, the chronology of discoveries of water on Mars. And so we have speculation back to 1971 with the Mariner 9 mission, but we don't really have any sort of actual water on Mars stories until around 2008. Okay. So of course, that's 10 years, 11 years now. But you got to think, right? Wouldn't this be one of those things that we're talking about constantly? Now we know there's water on Mars since 2008. And again, it falls out of the mainstream. Like, unless you're an astronomy buff and look into this stuff all the time, you wouldn't even know it, right? You'd still think Mars is just dry and barren. Am I right there, Frank?
It's almost like there's a momentum of opinion out there that facts don't matter at all. It's just what people think. If people think something, then it's true no matter what. And I think we're seeing that with Mars. Mars is the dry, dusty planet. The entire thing is a desert. There's no water there. There's no atmosphere. There's no nothing. And you brought up a good point. Is for years and years and years, we've seen pictures of the planet, and there's no ice caps on the top, no ice caps on the bottom. It's completely red, completely dry, completely barren. And despite conspiracy theorists pointing these things out, a little bit of color here, a channel, ancient riverbed here and there. Still, for some reason, we think that Mars is dry. It's completely barren. There's no water, no ice, no nothing. And I wonder why that is. Is that the media, who's just not familiar with these recent pictures, pushing this narrative out there? I don't know. I think if people knew that we could go to Mars and find water, because you can turn water into oxygen to breathe, you can turn water into hydrogen to make rocket fuel. You can use water to support life, to grow crops. If people knew there was water there, I think our stance on going to Mars, setting up a base, it would be a lot different, and there'd be a lot more political pressure to do so.
And therein lies the conspiracy, right? So call us tinfoil hatters, but if people don't know that there's water on Mars, it doesn't really make it a target, right? We've had Elon Musk with SpaceX and these types of things. Some of these private companies, Blue Origin, all the big billionaires are trying to get to Mars. Well, that's a good thing. Except, why is the public not behind this? Okay, so there's that. All right, now check this one out. Moving on to this next article here. This is reported by earthsky.org. And you can see clearly, it's unbelievable. They have a photograph from the ice-filled Korolev crater, okay, as seen by Mars Express, which is a Mars orbiter. And you look at the thing, and this looks like it could be on Earth. Like, this is a crater filled with frozen ice. And it may not be all water. There might be methane, or there might be other elements in this. But obviously, there's going to be a ton of water in this crater, just eyeballing it. And so one more time, if you're not familiar with this, why aren't you? This should be headline news across the world. I just don't understand.
I've been thinking for a long time now that NASA wants Mars for themselves. Whether NASA is a breakaway government or whether it's an American centrism that they want, no, they want Mars, they want the planet. And I was wondering, how could they do that? Like, we have all these countries around the world that also have space programs that could also build Mars bases. I think they've been purposely suppressing this information, making Mars seem like an unlikely target for colonization. There's no water there. You couldn't survive there. Suppressing these images, not putting them out in the media, so that they could have Mars for themselves. Like, if you found a deposit of gold in the mountains in your backyard, you certainly wouldn't tell anyone else about it. The same thing here. I think they're suppressing this information on purpose so they can go there and set up a colony, and other countries simply aren't interested because they don't have the full story.
Yes, exactly. Something to that effect. At the very least, the media on Earth is not interested. Like almost the entire media. You get the astronomy communities and sub-communities. Of course they're interested. They know these things. It's common knowledge. But how come if you polled just a random sampling of people, they would tell you there's no water on Mars? That's a thing. It's ridiculous. Okay, so let's move on to this next one. Now, this is current. This just happened, and this is reported by CNET. And the headline here is, Scientists Find First Evidence of Huge Mars Underground Water System. Okay, and they have, there's a nice video. Links will be below if you guys want to check this stuff out. But here's the crazy part. Okay, there's a whole scientific paper that they did. I think it's 5 or 6 people contributed, and they're talking about the actual geological positions of Mars and how it not only reflects surface water in the past, but underground. Well, water just does not escape easily from an atmosphere, even a light atmosphere like Mars. So where do you think that water went, Frank?
I don't know. I really don't know, because NASA isn't giving us the information. They're not telling us the story. I have to wonder, underground water? Yeah, I can see that. But you're right. All this water that was there didn't just disappear, didn't go anywhere. So it must still be there. It must still be there somewhere. And, even here on Earth during ice ages, ocean levels fell because all this water was accumulated in these ice caps. It was all gathered together in these ice caps. Maybe that's what we're seeing here, just an ice age on Mars. All this water congregated, concentrated in these ice caps. And who knows, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, maybe this ice age will end and we'll have liquid water on the surface once more.
Exactly. And so now, here's the paper. This is actually again, we'll link this down below if you want to check out the actual scientific paper. Interesting stuff. Authors did a great job, but it begs the question to me. If they're saying there was underground water on Mars in its past, there was water on the surface in its past, is it ridiculous to say and to think water flowing underground on Mars right now?
We've seen so many conspiratorial style videos of artifacts and strange anomalies captured by the Mars rover. Spoons, things that look like remains, skulls, a stone that looks like it's worked by tools. This list goes on and on and on. There's probably 1 million pictures out there of stuff that looks out of place on Mars. And so you have to wonder about this. We know there's water there. We know it once had an atmosphere. And NASA will say that the spoon image and all these artifacts are just pareidolia. You're seeing things that really aren't there. You're matching patterns to ideas that are in your... But you have to wonder, we had water, we had an atmosphere, and we have all these artifacts. Maybe there was life on Mars. The more we see, it makes sense. If there was never any water on the planet whatsoever, I can easily say, I can feel that there's no life there. Nothing ever lived there. But here we go. We got underground water, liquid water. We've got huge amounts of ice on the surface. And we've got all these artifacts. So what's the story here? What's going on? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I think if you follow the mainstream, they would tell you nothing's going on here. And even this paper, as we see with a lot of these scientific journals, people are unwilling to take these risks. Because if this is a thing of the past, why is this not a thing of the current times? I don't understand. Like, why are we here abstracting the past from this paper and not actually flirting with the idea that maybe there are underground oceans on Mars currently? It's pretty crazy stuff. And if that's the case, right, it opens up an entirely new everything. Because guess what? That means there might be life under the surface on Mars, in the flowing water that might be prevalent, that might be abundant. It just it's crazy to me how we tiptoe and tiptoe and tiptoe, and everybody's scared to say it. But I think we're gonna soon find out there's life on Mars.
And we've seen that recently too. The cycling methane concentrations in the atmosphere during different times of year, there'll be a different amount of methane in the atmosphere. Methane is an organic compound made by life. They've also found other different organic compounds in the soil. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. We have water there. We have methane. We have other organic compounds. Maybe life migrated underground. We have underground life here. It could be there too. So let's get out there. Let's go there. Let's find these things out. Again, if people knew that there was water on Mars everywhere, in huge concentrations in ice caps, I think there'd be a lot of political pressure to go take a visit, put a base there. And unfortunately, the news media just isn't covering this stuff.
Yeah, they won't allow it. And so, you know where political pressure comes from, guys? That's right. It comes from you. It comes from your voice. It comes from you knowing these things and not having them covered up by the mainstream media. So here we are. If you like this type of conversation, come join us at Troubled Minds Radio.